Have you ever woken up one day after a profound spiritual experience and felt like everything that once drove you suddenly vanished? The goals, the passions, the fire to achieve, all gone, like smoke in the wind. You're not depressed, you're not broken, you've simply seen through the illusion, and now you're standing in a strange, silent space where the old world no longer moves you. What if I told you this loss of motivation isn't a mistake, but a doorway into something deeper, something far more real than anything you ever chased before? The collapse of the ego-driven self after spiritual awakening is one of the most disorienting and misunderstood aspects of the entire journey. It is not merely the loss of interest in goals or ambition. It is the dissolution of the very structure that held your identity together for most of your life. The ego, in psychological terms, is not simply arrogance or pride. It is the image you have constructed of yourself, your name, your status, your achievements, your plans, your beliefs about what you must become. From early childhood, this ego is shaped by family, culture, schooling, social media, and the subtle suggestions of society. It learns to crave validation, to chase success, to fear failure, to define self-worth by comparison and productivity. It becomes the center of gravity in your life, organizing your days around goals and identities that, although artificial, feel intensely real. When a spiritual awakening occurs, whether through meditation, trauma, loss, or sudden insight, that artificial center begins to dissolve. The patterns of thought and behavior that were once automatic start to lose their hold. You may find yourself suddenly unable to care about things that once consumed you. Promotions, praise, competition, or even long-term plans begin to feel hollow or absurd. You no longer believe in the roles you played, but you have not yet discovered who or what you truly are. This is often where the confusion arises. Society tells you to be motivated, to keep pushing forward, to produce. But something within you knows that pushing forward would now be a lie. You're not tired in the physical sense. You're existentially exhausted because your internal compass has been broken, or rather exposed for what it truly was, a mechanism of survival, not of truth. In this space, motivation disappears because the engine that once drove it, the ego, is no longer intact. But this collapse is not a failure. It is a sacred dismantling. Without this collapse, the deeper self, the true self, has no room to emerge. However, in the immediate aftermath, this shift is often experienced not as liberation, but as paralysis. You may question your purpose, feel disconnected from your work, relationships, and even your own thoughts. You may find yourself unable to pretend enthusiasm for things that now strike you as empty performances. This is deeply unsettling because the ego gave your life structure, and now that structure is gone. You are not motivated because you are no longer operating from illusion. And the truth is, you can't go back. Once you've seen the artificial nature of the ego's world, returning to it is like trying to believe in a dream after waking up. But you haven't fully arrived at what is real yet either. This is the in-between state, where the ego has crumbled, but the deeper self has not yet taken root in the world. The soul needs time to reorient. It doesn't speak the language of goals and metrics. It moves in symbols, synchronicities, intuition, and silence. It whispers instead of shouts. Until you learn to listen to that voice, it may feel as if there is no voice at all. Many people mistake this phase for depression or laziness, and some even try to force themselves back into ego-driven habits just to escape the void. But those habits feel dead because, for you, they now are. The house of cards has fallen, and you are standing in the ruins. What you are experiencing is not a breakdown, it is a clearing. You have not lost motivation, you have lost illusion. What comes next will not be based on fear or performance, it will emerge from truth. But only if you are willing to stand in the emptiness long enough to let the truth speak. After a spiritual awakening, something unexpected often surfaces. Not peace or clarity, but a deep confrontation with aspects of yourself you may have spent a lifetime avoiding. These parts do not arrive gently. They emerge forcefully, sometimes in dreams, in moods you can't explain, in sudden surges of emotion or behavior that feel alien to your conscious personality. This is the shadow, the rejected, hidden, or disowned parts of your psyche. And when awakening breaks down the superficial ego structure, the shadow rises to fill the space, not to destroy you, but to be seen, understood, and ultimately integrated. Before awakening, the ego plays a gatekeeper role. It controls what is acceptable to be seen and what must be pushed into the unconscious. Anger, jealousy, fear, shame, insecurity. These qualities are often denied or repressed because they don't fit with the image we have crafted of ourselves. A good person doesn't get jealous. A strong man doesn't cry. A spiritual seeker doesn't feel rage. These judgments don't eliminate these traits, they bury them. But what is buried doesn't disappear. It festers. The unconscious holds these rejected parts, and they influence your life from the shadows, shaping decisions, reactions, and relationships without your awareness. Spiritual awakening is often imagined as a blissful experience, but the truth is far more complex. The light of awakening exposes the shadow with terrifying clarity. Suddenly you begin to see the full range of your humanity. You see where you have lied to yourself, where you've manipulated others, where you've been driven by wounds and insecurities rather than conscious choice. You see the masks you wore, not only to impress the world, but to survive in it. And this revelation doesn't come gently. It comes like a storm. It can feel like you are breaking down, falling apart, losing control. And in a sense, you are. You are losing control over the narrative that once kept the uncomfortable truths of your psyche buried. This confrontation with the shadow often leads to a sharp decline in motivation. You may feel emotionally overwhelmed, psychologically fragmented, or simply numb. Nothing seems important or worth doing because your internal world is in upheaval. You are not lazy, you are under siege by the contents of your own unconscious mind. The shadow asks to be faced, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a part of you to be understood. Yet, this process is exhausting. It takes energy to hold together a coherent sense of self, and when that coherence breaks down, your energy goes toward inner survival rather than outward action. There is also fear, deep, primal fear. You may be terrified of what you are discovering within yourself. Perhaps you've realized how much resentment you carry, how much pain you've suppressed, or how much you've compromised who you really are to be accepted by others. The temptation in this phase is either to deny the shadow again, retreating into distraction or false positivity, or to collapse into it completely and lose your sense of self in despair. Neither path leads to healing. The shadow demands that you stay present with it, not to indulge it, but to see it, to hear it, and ultimately to reclaim the life energy trapped within it. This energy, once acknowledged and integrated, can become a powerful source of creativity, passion, and depth. But before this transformation can occur, the initial meeting with the shadow often suspends motivation entirely. You are navigating a storm of inner truths, each one capable of shaking your identity. You are being asked to accept your full humanity, and this is not a passive process. It is deeply active, inwardly demanding, and emotionally turbulent. During this time, you may withdraw from the world, not out of weakness, but because something sacred and dangerous is unfolding within, the truth of who you are, in all its light and darkness. When a spiritual awakening occurs, one of the first things that begins to disintegrate is the individual's attachment to external structures that once offered a sense of identity, stability, and direction. These structures, career, relationships, social roles, wealth, recognition, are often the scaffolding upon which the ego has built its house. Before awakening, these outer frameworks feel like purpose itself. They provide validation, goals to pursue, and a way to measure progress. Society reinforces these structures constantly, rewarding conformity, achievement, and competition. So naturally, most people align their lives around them, believing that motivation and meaning are found in ascending these ladders. But awakening pulls back the curtain. The sense of separation between the self and the world begins to dissolve. The illusion of permanence and importance assigned to these external symbols starts to weaken. What once felt like pillars of purpose begin to appear as temporary, constructed, and in many ways arbitrary. You begin to see through the social scripts. The climb toward financial success, social approval, or recognition no longer stirs your spirit because you can now sense how much of it is rooted in fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of being unseen, fear of being unloved. This doesn't mean that jobs, relationships, or success are inherently meaningless. Rather, it is the way one relates to them that shifts dramatically. In the midst of this revelation, a strange emptiness can emerge. You may feel as if you're floating without an anchor, as if everything you used to strive for has been drained of its color. This isn't depression in the clinical sense, it's disorientation. You've awakened to a reality that doesn't place ultimate value in things the world treats as sacred, and yet you're still here, still alive, still part of the same social machinery. You're asked to continue participating in a world that no longer resonates with your inner truth. The result is a deep rupture between your inner state and the external world, and this rupture often manifests as a sudden loss of motivation. It's not that you don't want to live or engage, it's that you no longer want to pretend. You can't fake enthusiasm for goals that no longer align with your evolving understanding of meaning. What once lit a fire within you now feels like a hollow performance. Even the well-meaning advice of others, set new goals, make a vision board, hustle harder, falls flat. These suggestions assume you're still playing the same game, but you've stepped outside of it, and the rules no longer apply. What compounds the difficulty is that society rarely has space for this kind of inner transformation. There is little room to pause, reflect, or spiritually deconstruct without being labeled unproductive or lost. The structures around you demand performance, consistency, and progress. But your inner world is undergoing an existential realignment. You are recalibrating your compass from external validation to inner truth. During this time, it is common to feel disconnected from work, relationships, and long-held ambitions, not because these things have no value, but because their value can no longer be defined by appearances or achievement alone. This gap between outer expectation and inner reality creates friction. You may feel pressured to return to your former pace, to re-engage with the world on its terms, to reignite old ambitions for the sake of continuity or survival. And yet something in you resists, not out of laziness or defeat, but because the soul cannot be motivated by illusions it has seen through. You find yourself needing meaning that is not borrowed, motivation that is not manufactured. Until that is discovered or emerges naturally, there is often a period of deep stillness, retreat, or confusion. You are no longer who you were, and the world is no longer what it seemed. In this space of unknowing, motivation evaporates, not as a flaw, but as a sign that something truer is trying to take shape. After spiritual awakening, the individual's relationship with life begins to shift in a fundamental way. There is a noticeable movement away from constant doing toward a deeper sense of being. For most of life, especially in the modern world, identity and worth are tied to productivity, goals, performance, and achievement. We are taught to act, to strive, to push forward at all costs. Our days are filled with schedules, deadlines, and metrics, all pointing toward some future moment of supposed fulfillment. In this model, doing is everything. The more you do, the more you are valued, not only by others, but by yourself. Spiritual awakening disrupts this paradigm. It introduces a dimension of awareness where the compulsion to act loses its grip. The inner experience becomes more spacious, more present, and less reactive. Silence becomes more bearable, even desirable. The need to constantly be engaged in activity or to chase validation weakens. In its place arises a kind of witnessing presence, a subtle shift from identification with the actor to identification with the observer. This change is subtle but profound. It is no longer enough to achieve or complete tasks. There is now a need for authenticity in action, a need for alignment with something deeper than habit or ambition. This change is often interpreted by the mind as a problem. Motivation seems to vanish. There is no urgency to chase success or accumulate accomplishments. You may find yourself sitting in stillness for long periods, or walking aimlessly, or simply observing life without feeling the urge to manipulate it. The ego interprets this as laziness or passivity. It judges this stillness because it has been conditioned to equate value with output. But something entirely different is happening. The soul is learning to inhabit the present moment. It is becoming reacquainted with life itself, not as something to control or conquer, but as something to participate in with reverence and openness. The ego, being goal-oriented and future-driven, does not know what to make of this shift. It panics in the face of stillness, fearing irrelevance or collapse. Yet the deeper self, the essence that awakening begins to uncover, has no such fear. It exists timelessly, outside the demands of performance. Its movement is not driven by scarcity or pressure. It moves when it is right to move. This new mode of being is not inactive, but it is not anxious activity either. It is action that arises from presence, from inner clarity, not from compulsion or external pressure. This transition from doing to being can feel disorienting because there is often a gap in understanding. The individual may still be surrounded by people who measure life in terms of achievement, who ask what you've done lately or what's next on your list. These questions now feel foreign. There may be an urge to respond with fabricated plans just to avoid being seen as aimless, but deep down, there is a growing resistance to pretending. This inner resistance is not a flaw. It is the beginning of a new integrity, one that no longer allows for self-betrayal in the name of appearances. It is important to recognize that this shift does not mean you will never act again, or that you will live in permanent retreat from the world. Rather, the doing that returns will be different. It will be rooted in a quiet inner certainty. It will be free from the noise of expectation. But before that more aligned action can arise, there is often a necessary period of rest, of silence, of deconditioning. The nervous system is recalibrating, the mind is shedding old compulsions, and the heart is learning to feel again without defense. In this space, doing loses its dominance, and being steps forward, not as passivity, but as a deeper form of presence that will eventually give rise to action that is whole, clear, and true. After a spiritual awakening, there is a strange and often unsettling period where the old self has fallen away, but the new self has not yet emerged. It is a space in between, a psychological and spiritual limbo that feels both empty and full at the same time. The structures that once defined who you were, what you believed, and why you acted no longer have the same meaning. You have seen through the illusions that shaped your identity, but you have not yet found a clear path forward. In this suspended state, it is common to feel a lack of motivation, not because you are unwilling to act, but because the foundation from which your actions once arose no longer exists. This void is not just a moment of confusion. It is a profound transformation at the level of being. The old self, the one driven by ego, social conditioning, inherited values, and personal narratives, has been deconstructed. It may not be fully gone, but it has been destabilized. What once felt solid now feels porous. What once felt urgent now feels irrelevant. You are no longer convinced by the story you told yourself about who you needed to be. But without that story, you also don't know who you are. This absence of identity is not easily tolerated by the mind. The ego thrives on definitions, roles, and purpose. In the absence of these, it feels lost and threatened. During this phase, many experience a deep sense of purposelessness. The motivation that previously came from ambition, fear, desire, or duty disappears. This can feel like a loss of direction, but it is more accurately a pause before a deeper direction can be known. The psyche is undergoing a realignment, and the soul is quietly preparing a new center of gravity. However, this preparation does not happen on the level of conscious will. It happens in the dark, beneath the surface, outside of control. The feeling of being unmotivated is not a malfunction. It is the space being cleared for something more authentic to arrive. This phase can also bring up a sense of existential anxiety. The absence of a clear identity or role can trigger questions that have no easy answers. What am I supposed to do now? What do I actually care about? Is anything real or worth pursuing? These questions do not arise from the intellect alone. They come from a deeper place that is no longer satisfied with superficial answers. They arise because the soul is awakening to the possibility of a different kind of life, one not dictated by the past or by inherited expectations. But this kind of life cannot be rushed into. It has to emerge naturally, and that emergence often requires time, silence, and stillness. In this in-between space, even small tasks can feel monumental. The energy that once fueled movement outward is being redirected inward. This is the time when introspection deepens, dreams become more vivid, and emotional layers that were once suppressed begin to rise. It can feel like emotional detoxification. Grief, regret, longing, and confusion may surface with intensity, not because anything new has gone wrong, but because there is finally space for these unprocessed parts of the self to come into awareness. The absence of motivation is often the nervous system's way of slowing everything down so that this deeper inner work can take place. There is also a quiet wisdom in this pause. While the ego wants to leap toward the next identity or purpose, the deeper self resists premature answers. The soul is not in a hurry. It understands that the new self cannot be fabricated or forced. It must be discovered, not created. This discovery requires trust in the unknown and a willingness to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. In the emptiness, something real begins to take shape, not as a flash of inspiration, but as a slow unfolding. And until that unfolding begins to guide you, motivation will often remain dormant, not because you are lost, but because you are still becoming. After a spiritual awakening, one of the most disorienting realizations is that the old goals, dreams, and aspirations that once seemed meaningful no longer hold the same power. You may look at your previous ambitions with a sense of detachment or even disbelief, wondering how they once had such a strong hold over your life. The goals that once drove you, wealth, recognition, relationships, influence, now appear through a different lens. They are no longer compelling, not because they are bad or wrong, but because your perspective has fundamentally changed. What has shifted is not the world, but your relationship to it. The lens through which you once viewed success and fulfillment has been shattered, and what replaces it is a growing desire for something more real, more aligned, more whole. This transition often leads to a collapse in external motivation. When the driving force behind your previous actions was rooted in proving something, to others, to yourself, to society, those motives lose their grip after awakening. You can no longer pretend to care about climbing ladders that lean against the wrong walls. The moment you see through the illusion, you can't unsee it. And what replaces it is not always a new goal, but often a void. The soul, newly awakened, refuses to pursue what feels false, but it also doesn't rush to replace it with a new illusion. Instead, it waits. It listens. It begins to ask different questions, questions that don't have immediate answers. This lack of drive is often misinterpreted as confusion or aimlessness, but it's a deeper kind of honesty. You're no longer willing to betray your inner truth just to feel productive. You may find it difficult to make decisions because the old framework for decision-making, what brings the most benefit, what leads to the most success, has collapsed. You are not confused in the conventional sense. You are being reoriented. You are waiting for new roots to form in deeper soil. Until then, chasing external goals feels hollow, and forcing yourself into action feels like self-abandonment. There is also the challenge of navigating a world that still operates by the old measures of success. You may find it difficult to explain your lack of direction to others. You may feel pressure to get back on track, to set new goals, to re-engage with the rhythm of ambition. But something in you knows that to do so would be to lie to yourself. This inner honesty can be isolating, but it is also profoundly necessary. You are no longer willing to move from fear, or from the need for approval, or from the conditioned belief that your worth depends on what you achieve. This is not apathy, it is transformation. And transformation requires that something die before something else can be born. In this case, what dies is your identification with goals that were never truly yours to begin with. What emerges, slowly and often painfully, is the beginning of a new orientation, a kind of inner compass that doesn't follow external maps. The actions that arise from this compass will not be based on achievement or validation, but on truth, intuition, and resonance. But before this compass can fully guide you, there is a necessary period of quiet, of undoing, of release. In this stillness, your system is learning to discern between noise and signal. You are learning to act not out of compulsion, but from clarity. You begin to value presence over performance, alignment over achievement. The old goals were often loud and urgent, propelled by fear or longing. The new sense of purpose, when it comes, will be quieter, more grounded. It will arise not as something you chase, but as something that calls you, gently, unmistakably, and without pressure. Until then, the emptiness you feel is not failure. It is sacred space, making room for something more real to emerge. In the aftermath of spiritual awakening, the disappearance of motivation is not a sign of failure. It is a sacred unraveling. The illusions that once fueled your ambition begin to dissolve, and in their place comes silence, stillness, and a confrontation with all you once avoided within yourself. You are no longer driven by fear, validation, or the pursuit of externally defined success. What feels like confusion or emptiness is actually the space between identities, the death of the false self, and the slow, quiet emergence of something more whole. You are being called to live from the center of your being rather than from inherited scripts. This is not a detour from your path, it is the path. The soul does not rush, nor does it shout. It waits for alignment, for truth, for presence, and only then, when the noise has settled and the inner world has been made ready, does true motivation arise, not as compulsion, but as clarity, not to escape yourself, but to express the fullness of who you are becoming.